Today's discussion is with Sonia Formato and Andrew Sternad. Sonia is a senior director with Foreside who oversees the firm's distribution consulting efforts and is responsible for managing strategic relationships with intermediaries. Prior to joining Foreside, she worked as a relationship manager with Fidelity Investments, where she consulted on fund product and positioning and led the build-out of Fidelity's funds network distributor service model. Sonia has over 30 years of industry experience. Andrew oversees Foreside's relationship management efforts, and prior to joining Foreside, he managed client relationships, provided distribution consulting, and oversaw dealer and AP agreements at Quasar Distributors, a firm that Foreside acquired in 2020. Andrew has over 16 years of experience within the financial services industry. Sonia, Andrew, welcome to the Foreside Spotlight Series.
Thank you, Mark. Happy to be here today.
Indeed. Thanks, Mark. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. And we're thrilled to have both of you join us and provide your subject matter expertise on this particular topic. The purpose of our Spotlight Series is twofold. First, provide a high-level introduction to a specific Foreside service or partnership. And secondly, deliver a clearer understanding about the service that one may not get with a standard presentation or fact sheet. And on that note, let's dive into our discussion of closed-end interval and tender offer funds. We'll start with a big picture question. In the past several years, we've seen an increase in demand for alternative products, which has led to an increase in supply. And while alternative strategies can be packaged in different wrappers, we're here today to discuss unlisted closed-end interval and tender offer funds. Although these funds are still considered niche products when compared to traditional registered and private funds, what has changed in the marketplace that has led to the rise in popularity? And with that, I'll start with you, Sonia.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, no, happy to jump into that. I think one thing you're saying is kind of this product wrapper has it sits at the intersection of what end retail investors are looking for in a low yield environment. They're looking for what alternative managers or private fund managers are bringing to institutional type investors. So they're craving the access to those type of strategies. And on the other side of the equation, you have asset managers who are seeing an enormous opportunity set with the retail marketplace and reaching some very high net worth individuals on that side. So the product wrapper really is a great opportunity to bring those two together and allow the manager to manage their less liquid underlying strategies in a wrapper that can deliver it in a manner that is able to be accessed by more of a retail type audience. So it's definitely kind of timing, I think, from that perspective. I would also highlight, the marketplace and the growth. This year alone, through half year, there has been about 15 new fund registrations, 10 on the interval fund side, 5 on the tender side, and I know we'll get into more detail around the differences between those two structures. And just for kind of perspective, there is about $45 billion across 67 funds as of the end of October for interval funds, and about $40.3 billion across 76 funds for that same time period for tender offer funds. So definitely a growing marketplace, still light in comparison to where we see mutual fund and ETF assets in the trillions, but definitely a growing market.
Yeah, Sonia, I'd like to build on that a little bit, some brief historical context. Much in the same way, SPACs aren't new, despite all the rapid fanfare over the past couple of years. These types of products, both interval funds and tender offer, have really been around for some period of time. I think the marketplace conditions, which you nicely explained, combined with some of the just general improved understanding of the operations, which we're going to talk about. As boring as that may sound, the operations are so critical towards understanding how to make these products work in the marketplace. I think those conditions have really come together nicely to sort of improve the marketplace IQ around the products and made them a bit more acceptable to the large place custodians in the marketplace. And Mark, I think that's had a lot to do with why these have seen the types of growth that we've articulated here at the outset.
Yeah, those are excellent points. Thank you. And I would also agree with you too. The industry is seeking to solve a problem, and that problem is yield. And given the low interest rate environment that we've been in for the past several years, what sort of wrappers or products can, provide that enhanced yield, to investors, especially those that are retired and really need to supplement their incomes. And I think this particular strategy, or this big product, I should say, be an individual, a tender offer fund, seeks to provide that solution. And then the next sort of topic we hear oftentimes from asset managers is really understanding the differences between individual and tender offer funds. Not only do asset managers need to ensure their strategy is compatible with a closed-end fund structure, but they also need to ensure the liquidity of the portfolio falls within the repurchase requirements associated with these types of funds, which are very different. Can you speak to the primary differences between these two structures? And Andrew, I'll start with you first.
Yeah, I may ultimately kind of swing things back to you, Mark, on this, because rather than dwell perhaps on much of the very detailed parts of the various rules, in interval funds mainly, what we're really talking about is what is known as Rule 23C-3. Things are a bit more explicitly defined for the interval funds. There shall be a fundamental policy, and there's a lot of very specific frameworks, mechanisms, and restrictions on how the interval funds shall operate. Whereas with the tender offer funds, things are a bit more open-ended, and maybe that's the wrong pun to use. There's a lot more board discretion throughout the rules that can really, I think, distinguish between a tender offer fund, whereas an interval fund is a bit more predictable. And maybe, Mark, I'll maybe open that to you to maybe supplement some of those thoughts. That's really kind of how I view the distinguishing characteristic between the interval fund and the tender offer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really think sort of the first, analytical point that firms need to take is, their strategy, right? Can their strategy fit an individual fund versus a tender fund, and what makes the most sense on that end? I will say that I think all things being equal, that an individual fund structure is better. I think it's going to be more receptive to your audience, the RIAs, the introducing broker dealers, et cetera, as it relates to selling the product to their clients. It has a bit more of a structure on liquidity and redemption periods and things of that nature. So again, if you're looking at both of these vehicles and assuming your strategy fits, then I think generally the individual structure is the best way to go if you can. Sonia, would you agree with that, or do you have anything else to add?
No, Mark, I would agree with both what you and Andrew have outlined, definitely focusing, Andrew, on the scheduled versus kind of the discretionary repurchases. But I think you highlight it well, Mark. It's that underlying strategy, and are you going to be able to kind of deliver that liquidity during that repurchase period on those regular intervals in an interval fund versus the tender offer fund, which makes it much more, acting like a private fund where the board has discretion. And it definitely, as you highlighted, drives to where it fits on the platforms, where tender offer funds are going to fit more on the alternative platforms and act and much more like those type of private fund structures. But yet, the interval fund is going to sit, more on the regular type of platforms and targeting more of that retail investor, most likely then facilitating kind of trade and settlement through FundServe versus having to do the check-in app through the AIP. So it all has to do with, kind of the liquidity of the underlying kind of product, as well as, the end investor in your target there. So I would just add that in, Mark.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It really does. And, oftentimes, as you know, we're speaking to private fund managers that are not accustomed or experienced with the 40X space. So it's really new territory to them. And when we speak to these firms that are exploring, unlisted closed-end funds, we're typically asked about startup considerations. Who do they need to work with for service providers, time to market, cost, et cetera. So let's touch a bit upon that. And Andrew, I'll start with you.
Yeah, without a doubt, and as I kind of highlighted at the outset, these aren't brand new. And the reason I like to emphasize that is a lot of the major service providers in the industry, including where I've come from, we've really gained a lot of experience in understanding how these actually come to market. And I know it's not no one's favorite topic, but having an understanding of NSCC and fund serve settlement and trading, it's critical. It's critical. In my humble view, the greatest obstacle for interval funds has been trying to figure out settlement. The marketplace figuring out settlement. How do we support a QSIP that doesn't have daily liquidity like the other 20,000 QSIPs that are in the marketplace? And we're going to talk about this a bit, but having the educational conversations with the service providers, whether it's a transfer agent, a fund administrator, which certainly is going to have their own new workflow as it relates to servicing an interval fund, it's really critical. So spending ample time well in advance of certainly even having the filing, I think is critical for those asset managers, whether they do have experience with present day open-end mutual funds or not. I think it's such an important part of the preparation before you even have that filing.
Yeah, Sonia, anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I would definitely, as you look through and start to think about, moving into that open-end space and kind of mutual funds versus interval and tender funds, there are definitely a lot of differences as you continue to look through the cost structure. Definitely the startup costs are more kind of hefty compared to a 40 Act mutual fund. There is a requirement on the interval and tender funds to file separate registration statements for additional series and waiting for kind of the SEC's declaration of effectiveness. So you have, timing. So there's definitely a heavier lift, but there has to be, in the sense that you're really trying to, bring something that is less liquid into a regulated environment, and you're introducing a lot of regulations that private fund managers haven't had to deal with. So there's going to be many more things with regard to trading and transparency, as well as overall distribution. And I know we're going to talk about distribution next, and I think that's key around thinking through your target audience. And as well as Andrew noted, I think a big piece of the differences and when you're thinking through interval and tender funds and how they're going to operate on a platform environment, that operational component has to be first and foremost, because these are definitely things that are introducing additional kind of off the assembly line processes into an environment that is been built for many years on these platforms. So don't want to go into further detail. I know we'll be talking about distribution in our next slide, so I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think too, looking at the 40X space and speaking with firms that really aren't familiar, they may see it as a burden, but I really look at it as an opportunity. And I say that because, as we know, we work in a highly regulated industry. And if these firms are really seeking to broaden their audience and reach out to a retail audience, and in doing so, they're marketing the funds through other intermediaries, whether they're independent RIAs, independent broker-dealers, regional broker-dealers, wirehouses, et cetera, there's going to be a fair amount of due diligence. And these products have to have transparency. They have to have service providers that are doing their job and complying with applicable FINRA and SEC rules. So I think from that perspective, it just gives comfort to investors and to those individuals that are marketing the funds that there's an understanding and there's some background related to how these products are being managed. And with that, as you mentioned, Sonia, on to our next topic. It relates to distribution. And of course, the question that we're often asked is how to market these funds. Can you provide some thoughts on product positioning, intermediaries that tend to be the most receptive for these products, costs associated with assessing various platforms and other hurdles that managers will face? And Sonia, this is your forte, so I'm going to start with you.
Thanks, Mark. I would start with regard to distribution is really ensuring that is at the front end of the conversation, and you're building a product and are able to, market it to an audience that's looking to kind of, gain access to that strategy. So first and foremost, really looking at it from a product development perspective and ensuring that, you're able to reach an audience that is receptive and is going to want to invest in this product so it will grow. And then putting in the time and resources and commitment to hiring folks that understand that the intermediaries in the retail environment have specific requirements around not only the, time in the market or investor demand needed on that specific platform, but also, as I noted earlier, and I know Andrew did as well, the operational nuances, how they trade, where they sit on the platforms, if they're sitting on the alt side, if they're sitting on more of the traditional side. And there's going to be so many factors and, if-then statements that you're going to really come across. And I think that's what, we really enjoy at Foreside in our conversations with clients early on, is being a part of that with other service providers so we can provide that perspective and give you guidance around, initially, the easier kind of access point into that marketplace. And that typically ends up being the custodial platforms. And there again, you can sit, as I said earlier, either on the alt side or the more traditional mutual fund side, and both are going to have their own hurdles. There's going to be components around, again, the trading with FundServe or AIP. There's going to be decisions to be made of, how are you going to get out and market those? Definitely taking into account that cost is going to be a factor here. They're going to want the platforms I'm referencing, an upfront cost to onboard you as a fund family. They're going to want ongoing fees. There's going to be discussions around, share classes and where you're going to be positioned. And then once you make it on the platforms aren't, selling it for you. Like I said earlier, you have to have an audience that's receptive, and you have to have folks that are out there educating not only on the strategy, and I think this is critical and people don't really yet understand, education. That is first and foremost. The platforms are still a bit hesitant and guarded because, again, I noted in the previous question, you're taking things off an assembly line and having to open and close these tender windows. There have been industry developments with things such as mutual fund exchange, which is trying to give some more, structure around how that's happening. But we all have to understand that, investors need to understand the vehicle. The advisors that are selling it need to understand it. It's your job as the asset manager to educate them around the structure in addition to the strategy. So I'm sure Andrew has some great points to add and as well.
Yeah, your comments really triggered a lot of historical reflection on how we've experienced servicing the interval funds over the past, decade plus. And, to your point, at the outset, it was no, and that was at the operational platforms, back offices talking, no, we can't do this. That the risks are enormous. At 20,000 CUSIPs, our daily liquidity, redemptions all the time. And now you're supposed to, as you said, well put, take it off the assembly line and police these 12. I don't think so. So the resistance level was enormous purely on the operational side. The strategies are in demand. They've been in demand. The RIAs, the family offices, the institutions. There are people who clearly want access to the strategies. It was really getting over those hurdles at the outset, which goes to the point of education, which became important. And so for us as a service provider, having regular discussions, I think, was critical towards, improving our odds and trying to assist and make things more possible for our clients as they came to market with their interval fund products. The other component, which I thought one of the best conversations I had about 7 years ago with a prominent wirehouse, was she was basically quite frank. Andrew, how do we determine suitability with these, on the retail brokerage side? Great question. And then meanwhile, over here on the fee-based advisory side, how am I supposed to put this into a model? How do you rebalance with an interval fund? So, these are the fundamental questions that the house is asking themselves. So again, it didn't matter at the time how much demand there was for these products. The home office or whomever was trying to determine how do we fit the product into our walls. And once we saw some progress. So I think there's been greater comfort, and certainly, Sonia, that there's a couple, I think, firms we have in mind that I think have demonstrated a sophisticated understanding. It doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean it's inexpensive. It's quite the opposite. But I think we've seen, and there's a lot of evidence out there to show that some of these custodial platforms, it's not that they've, quote, figured it out, but they've figured out how to manage it. And I think that's to the betterment of others. I think there's some coattails that are getting longer in this space over time, and I think it's taken a while, but I think there's been significant progress from the custodial platforms in supporting the products.
I would agree, Andrew. I think there's definitely some clearly defined hurdles you need to meet or understand, and that really helps you as an asset manager who is developing a product to understand what the end product needs to look like. So if you have some, guidelines from the custodial platforms around, kind of pricing or daily NAV and all the operational kind of makeup of it, it will allow you to really think through that. And I would say also, the asset managers out there are extremely creative. And, we're starting to have conversations around, hybrid versions of interval and tender fund with a combination of, a board discretion and as well as the regular interval periods and, reaching, investor bases and such. So I think the innovation is there. And with that innovation, kind of having great open communication with, folks such as ourselves who are talking with the platforms and understand those requirements will help you think through that, as well as continuing, can't say it enough, to educate in the marketplace with, content and an understanding of how these fit, where they fit, and how they operate.
Yeah, and Sonia, I'll steal one of your lines. The philosophy of build it and people will come has never worked. I doubt it will ever work. And in addition to education, which I don't think we can underscore its importance, firms need to come to the table with a distribution plan and a well thought out one at that.
And I'll add, Mark, and this is true of your typical small cap fund too. You have to have demand. And with the interval fund, particularly since we've discussed all these hurdles that are operational, you've got to deliver that demand. Whether that's big, large RIAs, family offices, those folks have got to be your advocates. Which again, it always sounds like a reverse inquiry, but that's really what it is. You have to validate or prove to the custodial platform that you actually have this interest. And again, I recognize that's not too dissimilar from ordinary plain Jane vanilla mutual funds, but I think the premium is even higher for the interval funds because of the operational risks that you're asking them to undertake.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we wrap up today, let me ask you both one last question. Based upon what we discussed today, what is your top takeaway? Andrew?
Having maybe the cold water conversation with the service providers over the challenges, and I think Sonia, we've done what we can here to really highlight those at the outset. I think that's the thing to do is don't be afraid to have that sobering discussion, and hopefully whoever you're engaging with is going to level set with you, because this message has to be understood with asset managers. The last thing we want to do as providers is misstep on the expectations. And to me, that's the most important part of it, which again goes back to the ultimate, educating the asset manager on how this product operates in the market.
And Mark, I would add, as an asset manager and, kind of reiterating what we've all said here, make sure you're bringing a strategy that has that demand. So you're connecting those two. There's a need for it in the marketplace. Just don't look at the amount of assets and investors on the retail market and think, well, that's a slam dunk. I can easily, kind of broaden into a huge opportunity set. and understand that it's a more regulated environment on that side of the fence. So you're going to be introduced to a lot of new oversight, review, as well as, with the structure, again, educating the marketplace around it beyond your strategy. So you need to be patient, you need to be committed, and you need to kind of go in this eyes wide open and be willing to learn and kind of want to, ask the right questions so that you can, work with the various service providers to answer those going forward.
Yep. Great. Thank you. And with that, I think that really covers our topic today. I am sure the listeners will find this very informative, but Foreside stands at the ready to have, further, more granular discussions with firms that are looking to enter the space. And with that, Sonia and Andrew, thank you so much for your time and your participation today.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.